Good afternoon. This is Stacey Sanderson, and I am coming in to chat a little bit about feelings of not being good enough on this perhaps apropos rainy Monday afternoon. Earlier today, I was just scrolling through social media and found a little clip about feelings of not being good enough being associated with trauma, which of course is true, but my knee-jerk reaction to hearing that was to immediately want to interpret that in a way that makes sense. I think that the word trauma, complex trauma, PTSD are all overused, misunderstood, and confusing, and lead to two types of phenomenon. One is people thinking they have trauma when they don't, and the other one is people having quite a significant psychological bypass, thinking they don't have trauma. And I see both in the practice quite frequently. But I think it's important to consider trauma in a physiological sense. So if you are out riding your bike and you fall and you break your leg, just as an example, that's a physical trauma. Psychological trauma is an injury to the psyche, and it influences the central nervous system, which then, of course, can go on to influence the stress response system and other parts of the body or other parts of your physiology. And I'll talk about that a different time. What I've learned from spending hours in the therapy space, and more particularly in EMDR or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing work, is that really terrible things will happen to people, terrible things will be said to them, and they'll think it's their fault. So all trauma, be it interpersonal or be it something terrible you've witnessed or experienced, is processed through the lens of attachment. So that is to say, we understand our trauma and heal from it based on how heard, believed, witnessed, understood, and supported and protected we feel. I may have said protected twice. So, how that relates to feelings of not good enough is that if you've had a series of traumatic or highly stressful experiences, you can internalize blame for that. So that's somewhat about thinking that you deserve it, but it is where the mind goes. And even first responders, and especially first responders, I'll add that, can have these feelings of hopelessness and despair or even apathy. But this is also where there's an intersection of trauma and depression, where chronic feelings of worthlessness or not being good enough create an inner schema or belief system that influences our emotions. So that's part of where that intersectionality is. You don't have to have trauma, though, to experience depression or have feelings or schema of not being good enough. We live in a society and a culture, right, with its materialistic and consumer driven norms that feed this. We're repeatedly being told we're not good enough. But if whether you had a parent figure who was hypercritical, or whether you had a parent figure who ignored you or dismissed you or was overbearing, those seeds can definitely get planted. And I would also say that personality traits of sensitivity, because the word neuroticism really bothers me, And perfectionism can also contribute to this. So just a recap of that when we're treated badly, and I'm saying this very broadly, we can internalize the belief that it's because we're not good enough. And then the response to that, or the adaptation to that, if you will, is to overcompensate. So this might mean that, you become perfectionistic, you may be people pleasing, you may be codependent, you may you may internalize blame. That's something that I cope with quite often, is that if something goes wrong, my knee-jerk reaction is to think it's my fault, whether it is or not. So if you were a scapegoat in a narcissistic family system, you will be incredibly vulnerable to this particular schema. And in fact, that's very common. Now, conversely, if you are on the receiving end of a great deal of criticism, or ignored or dismissed or devalued, demoralized, there's of course that risk of developing a grandiose defense system, right? You may create an inner part of yourself that tells you that no, you're not less than, you're better than, right? I think we know where I'm going with this. And that can be the core of high narcissistic traits. I don't think it often is. I would go on record as saying that. I don't think it often is the case. So these feelings of not being good enough when we're younger go on to inform and contribute to the ways we adapt to this in terms of, again, our beliefs or our schema, our habits, and our patterns. In the book, I call this the attachment blueprint. That I also call it the attachment blueprint in transforming pain to power. So, going with this idea, if you have these deeply held beliefs that you're not good enough, guess what kind of relationships you tend to attract? Just think about it for a moment. That's right. We tend to then have more, on a good end, confident, but also people who are more highly narcissistic, right? So that's the connection to that. There are countless ways of working with themes of not being good enough. Cognitive behavioral therapy being one of the older ones. I can't believe that I'm getting old enough that I can now call CBT an older therapeutic modality, but I can. And I actually think it's quite effective. And that cognitive reframing is also woven into EMDR and other trauma modalities. It's woven into most forms of personal growth coaching. And it is also present if you just kind of went out there and bought a book or did some research about overcoming feelings of not being good enough. I personally take a trauma-informed approach to that as well, integrating interfamily systems and looking at really revisiting those old patterns so that they can be rebuilt. So you can't change it, but you can build over it, right? Kind of like if you have, as I say in the book, a layer of Lego blocks, and that's your foundation, but you can build on top of that. And so this is a lot of self-awareness, self-compassion, mindfulness, working wisely with those belief systems, which is to say, recognizing when you know that they're not true or not serving you. These are some of the ways. I think this takes time. I think that this is, it could be a lifelong journey, because if it is trauma based, that's part of your survival mechanism. Right? That's part of what you internalize to keep yourself safe. I know those words confuse people too, But those early messages we get in childhood, and this could be a parent, this could very well be a teacher, because I've heard it many times. This could be a sibling, friend, other relative, you name it, and then that can be perpetuated into your adult relationships. But I want to come back and talk a little bit about trauma before I forget. So we carry this interpersonal injury, we carry this injury of our sense of self, which influences then our sense of belonging, right? So all the crap we were told when we were younger, we then internalize and believe it's true, basically. But we carry this stuff in the central nervous system. It is reactivated in the stress response system. And it is very, very easily triggered. So just to revisit this, it will come up as perhaps feeling anxious or worried. Many people who struggle with anxiety have very chronic feelings of not being good enough or worthy, and feelings of or fears rather of upsetting people. It can show up in a more narcissistic way in competitiveness and comparing patterns. And as I said earlier, it can show up as perfectionism. So I'm sorry, I'm like totally looping, but there was a couple of things I forgot to say. But I do believe that if you make it your personal mission, this is something that can easily change. What challenges this is that many people I work with feel, interestingly, a sense of shame when they start more positively appraising themselves. So think about that. Feelings of not being good enough are about shame, but starting to integrate positive feelings can also bring up feelings of shame. So it's the same core wound. If this interests you, I have a go at your own pace on my website called Finding Your Way. I really did craft it with those themes of not feeling good enough in mind. So have a look if that interests you, or feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to answer any questions. But I wanted to take a bit of a departure today and talk about the core wounds, not just of narcissism, but of many early childhood experiences. So, as always, thank you so much for joining in the conversation. Uh, find me on social media, Stacey at Inquire Within, or go to the website if you're interested in hearing about more. But always happy to have people join the community. Community and a sense of belonging are probably one of the easiest ways of healing these early core wounds. So I wish you a most pleasant rest of your day, and take good care until we meet again.